Hello, welcome to the Ultimate Men's Movement. I'm your host, Dr. Jack Rocco, and thanks for joining once again. We have a guest today. We have Kyle Marcue. He is a mental health specialist and relationship mentor. And Kyle and I met on online, and we've been having some communications. And I always do like having men who treat men, women who treat men. Our focus is on men. He does relationships as well, which I think most men have need help with, need counseling and mentorship with. So I'd like to welcome Kyle Marcoux. Welcome, Kyle. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Jack. Appreciate it.
No problem. Now you're down in Florida, right?
Yeah, I'm in the St. Pete, Tampa area. Originally from Boston, because I know you're up in the Massachusetts area.
Yeah, I was
So,
going to get to that. What part of Boston were you from?
so I grew up in Waltham. I spent the majority of my childhood up in that area, and then it took me college took me to Providence, so not too far away, over in Rhode Island, and then went to LA, and then down here in Florida. I was sick of the cold, so I
Yeah, I
wanted the
don't
warm.
I don't blame you. I'm a Pennsylvania boy. I went to North Carolina and then my kids are up here, so brought me back into the storms. And this last year was brutal. 40
You,
inches the one week, the one year, 1 week.
Yep. Yeah, it was a tough one. I visited for Christmas. I got my few days of snow in. That was good for me, and I know it's been a cold one too. So hopefully summer's finally hitting up there, or at least
Yeah,
getting close to it.
right. All right, Kyle, why don't you get into your area of specialty, what you do, how you got there, what brought you to this field, and then we can get into some more specific topics. We want to talk about ultimately we're going to talk about gender roles in relationships and how gender roles are changing and everyone's trying to manage those and manipulate those, manage them within a relationship where you're, trying to get that work-life balance. So go ahead, take it away.
All right. So I started off getting my bachelor's degree in psychology. Ended up getting a master's in mental health therapy. So that's kind of where my clinical background is, and I've been a therapist now for going on maybe like 2014. So going about 12 years. So did it kind of the traditional way, traditional therapeutic style, working for corporate America, et cetera. And then actually about, 4 years ago, I really started to make a shift in things. And a lot of that was the catalyst behind that was I was diagnosed with cancer. And so cancer really opened my eyes up to seeing life a little differently. And I wanted to kind of do things differently with how I work with people, men and women. So I left corporate America, started my own business, and now I bring in an aspect of mentoring as well as kind of my therapeutic style. So it's more hands-on, it's more spending, like getting more feedback from the people I work with, having conversations outside of sessions, being able to give them things to work on, really going all in and providing a full therapeutic experience for the individuals that I work with. So that's kind of how I went from where I was to where I am now. And I've been doing that with the therapy background and the mentoring mixed in for the past 4 years. So,
That's good. I think that's a lot of what attracted me to you. I think we've been on similar journeys. I mean, I've spent 30 years in the orthopedic realm, traditional office-based, hospital-based practices. And I agree. I think you can become pigeonholed or limited in what you can offer in your 15-minute appointment. It becomes very structured. But
right.
very few people's lives are structured the way um, traditional hospital, traditional practices are. So I do, I enjoy that transition. So, we share that joy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you stand for as well. I think it is sometimes, we've been brought up a certain way that, you work the 9 to 5, you have, this is what you do, this is the order that you go in, and then this is how you proceed. But I think that that's really not what life is sometimes. There's a lot of curveballs that happen. And I think that when we can work with individuals and try to help other people, but not doing it like the typical standard way, whether it's how you practice or how I practice. I think that we're starting to see how much efficacy can happen through doing things in a different way. And I think that that's part of just the transition overall that we're seeing is life was a certain way for so long, you know. Men
Hmm.
do this, women do this, you know, you get married, you go to school, you have some kids, you know, not necessarily in that order. And then, you know, you retire and off you go. But now I think there's been definitely a shift in how humans are evolving and living, and also the gender roles that play a part in that.
Yeah, and I think the options were more limited before as well, and you can use the internet or the technology field in that, you worked for IBM, you worked for a few big companies back in the 50s or 60s, but then, as with the personal computer and everything else, people realized they could start, their own specialized niche, you know, be their own boss, live their own life, bring their own personality as opposed to trying to fit your personality into the square peg into the round hole that corporate America puts out there for you. Um, so I've enjoyed it as well, and I think it's both personally and professionally enriching. But also,
Mhm.
I think people look for that. The people who I'm sure you get the same thing. People who come into the office and they've got multiple issues. Very few people have, but the way things are geared
Mhm.
up, it's like whack-a-mole. It's like I'm here for my shoulder, but doc, can you take a look at my knee and my ankle? Well, I can't really do x-rays on all those, the insurance company's limit. So
Right.
it's here. It's free reign on what I can do. And is it similar for you? Who do you treat more individuals, more couples? What do you think your practice is made up of, and um, what do they come to you with?
Sure. What you're saying that I totally agree with you in regards to oftentimes someone will come to us with a symptom. And oftentimes, especially kind of in my field, I think maybe slightly more because the brain and the emotions, the brain is the most complicated thing that's ever been created with no user manual. So it's basically trying to figure it out as we go. And so they do come with us, or they come to me, I guess, or people in my field, but probably you as well, because I know your clinic is a little unique, that they come with us for something that usually is a symptom. And then we're trying to figure out what is the root, or what are the roots that are creating these symptoms. And then it's about how can we get creative to work with these individuals, and everyone is so very different. So a lot of the time, what people come to me for is, and actually, actually, I want to say this first. Who I work with first is typically one-on-one. I don't prefer to do couples. I think that it can sometimes get complicated, and it's just really not my cup of tea. I prefer to work with someone, and of course, a lot of people I work with are in relationships or are building towards a relationship. So, but I like to really work and focus on how can we help someone become the best version of themselves, help to learn the maladaptive patterns that they may have, and help bring awareness to that so that when they find it ready to enter a relationship, they're not coming in, unaware of what they're going to be bringing to the table. And of course, a lot of healing, a lot of growth happens within the relationship itself, but if you're coming into a relationship with not having any awareness of your patterns and the way that you are and the way that, you may come off to a potential romantic partner or even a friendship, then it's usually gonna head in a more negative direction than if you come in with some sense of awareness.
Yeah.
So,
What role do you think well, I think, we've talked about this a little bit, but speak a little bit on um, the role of the subconscious, and have you ever read the book, The Body Keeps Score? I think
the
that's
body, yeah, with Basil Vanderkok, yeah,
Yes, exactly.
yes, I have.
Fantastic book, but um,
Goes deep.
oh, very deep. A lot of great experiences that he incorporates into that live patients. But I was a neuroscience major as well, and the brain has always been my passion, which is why, me integrating my passion for neuroscience, psychology, pathology, addiction, all those things, trauma. Um, was a natural transition for me because neuroscience has been my passion. But in
Mhm.
general, the brain is made up into, three basic elements, your brain stem, which controls your breathing, your functions to keep you alive, your bowel movements, blinking, all those
Hmm.
innate reflexes. And then you've got the emotional brain, the limbic system, above that. And then you have the outer cortex, the neocortex, which, is a lot of our cognitive functions, our humanness, if you will, the things that
Right.
complicate. But in my book, I get into a lot of the pre-verbal trauma, before you get your operating system. You like you said, you don't get there's no instruction manual for this complex machine. And then on
Right.
top of that, half of it isn't even developed, or a third of it, a good portion of it isn't developed when you arrive in the world. And that period of growth and maturation and development of the brain, um, during a period where you're experiencing everything is new. If you try to put yourself back into that child's brain and the traumas, the exposures, the things that go into that child's brain early in life, um, develop the foundation for who you are. So you become who
Mhm.
you are with your cortical brain as it evolves. Um, but you don't have access to those subconscious, do you do any subconscious work? Do you find that's an issue on finding, going into childhood trauma and, why are you the way you are? And most people don't know. You have to really dig for that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely part of what I do. I think, like you said, because our brains are so malleable throughout our younger years, and brain really doesn't fully get evolved from what scientists are saying and studies are saying now until you're maybe 25. And who knows, that could change because we're learning so much about the brain, neuroscience every single year. And we come out with such new information. So I don't think anything that we're learning now is going to be the perfect gold standard because we're all so hungry to learn about how do humans work, how do our brains work. But yes, I think that our childhood years, our formative years, and there is, I think, that sense of nature versus nurture, and I think they're both very impactful. I mean, yes, we inherently have genetics from our parents, and we can learn from that, but I think that's also, in the sense of epigenetics, like how is nature affecting what genes get turned on and how people are influenced in an older age by what happened to them at a younger age. So that is something that I touch on with pretty much everyone I work with because it gives me a sense and it can give them a sense of maybe why they are the way they are, why they think, emote, and behave the way they do now, and how we can attribute it to possibly something in the past. And then it's also, yeah, we can dig into maybe some of the subconscious, uncover some layers to help people understand further. Oh, I didn't know this was part of it. Or maybe I was at such a young age that I had a defense mechanism that blocked off that memory because it was so traumatic. But now you don't realize that that has an effect on you as an adult. So sometimes it is about going there, uncovering maybe what did occur, but doing it in a safe, controlled method where you can piece by piece, slowly but surely, with proper guidance, proper support, professionals to work you through it so that you can start to not, you can never get rid of that experience. You can never get rid of that trauma, which is never the goal. It's more to how can you integrate what may have happened to you in the past to help strengthen who you are rather than take away from who you are. Does that make sense? Do you feel like you agree with
No,
that? You went through a lot
yeah,
too.
absolutely. And you hit a lot of the points that I discuss. And in my book, and we talked about this, I break it down into, my early childhood traumas are, and I hate to even call them traumas, it's just experiences, whatever. What defines a trauma, and I always use the analogy of, my son is a wrestler. We won Rhode Island States, finished third in New England this year. He's really doing fantastic. But, a lot of his training is traumatic. Losing a match is traumatic. But it's not trauma, it's training. It's preparing him for the next and the next. And, if you're going to be a wrestler, and he's going on to college to wrestle, um, you need to have that training. and that trauma. So that trauma builds you, and I think it, the iron gets heated up and molded for your purpose. So, but anyways, so a lot of my early experiences as a child, as an infant, had to do with relinquishment from my mother. Then integrating into this new family, which didn't necessarily connect or understand my genetics, my epigenetic history. That I
Mhm.
came to the table with. So then most of my outer brain, was developed by my family, by my culture, an Italian family, a close family, a blue collar family, in central, in northwestern Pennsylvania. You know what I mean? So all these environmental things that went to build into my nurturing often conflicted or didn't necessarily fully meld, with my inner brain, my brain stem, my brain stem that I was born with from my parents, my birth parents, my limbic system, which came from some of the early childhood relinquishment and issues that had, and then integrating these three different brains into what became Jack and then Dr. Rocco. So my journey through the book really had to go back and meditate on my time in the womb and what was my mother going through, and she's a young college student who has to give up this child. So did she really love me while I was in the womb? Was I a burden? Was I an embarrassment? Did I create all sorts of cortisol and adrenaline spikes in her because of her parents, her priest, her school counselors, her friends, all those stresses. And then she had to go away to visit an aunt before she relinquished me. So there's a lot of those, early experiences in the womb and that being bathed in cortisol and stress and movement and dysregulation. It wasn't a warm, nurturing environment, I could imagine. Um,
Right, yeah.
and like I said, but as I wrote the book and as I was dealing with my issues, I had to incorporate those into how did those how were those, theorize on how were those inner subconscious feelings affecting my learning? Made me more of a kiss ass, more of a wanting to be loved, wanting to be accepted, wanting to avoid relinquishment. You know what I mean? So there's always these inner fears, these inner fears that are molding the outer cortex as it develops. So you're right, it's a very symbiotic thing. But I did think that was helpful for me, to kind of
Mhm.
understand, I can be a little emotional, but those are from fears that I'm not necessarily facing right now. And I would
Right.
imagine that, when you dig into relationships, you're like, why is it that every time I break up with a girl, I just go off the edge? I just become reckless. I become self-destructive.
Mhm.
Or if I sense any, I think this was something that I dealt with, if I sense any hint, because I'm on hyper alert. How are they looking
Yeah.
at me? How are they thinking of me? How do I fit in? Because I don't really fit in. Um, so you sense some outsiderness, you sense some bad feelings, and you
Mhm.
overreact to that. So I do think that
Yeah.
these are things that a lot of people share and bring to relationships. And now you've got two people with both of their subconscious fears and how they react and the other one reacts. So
Right.
it does become very, very complex. So
Oh yeah.
I do think you can't talk relationships without dealing in the subconscious traumas that each person carries to begin with.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think that when you enter a relationship with someone, you're entering the relationship with everything from their past, like their experiences, their thought processes, like their traumas, you know, all that comes together. So when you have two people that are bringing that to the table, a lot of the times like there is going to be some conflict, and at the times there's going to be a good amount of compatibility, but I think that when you come to the table and you both bring it to each other and you're open about that, and there's like an open sense of like communication, which also does take that awareness which we talked about, which means that each person would hopefully have a sense of awareness and has done some work to understand like who they are and who they are in a relationship, because I think when you can bring that to each other and have a supportive relationship where conflict isn't going to lead to destruction, but conflict is going to lead to like growth and like a deeper connection with that other person, then all of a sudden the traumas from our past, the experiences from our past, some of those more negative, challenging experiences become opportunities to not only grow within ourselves, but to like grow within a relationship by allowing someone else to truly see us for who we are, which then entails a sense of vulnerability, which even to this day, even though there's been a big shift in how men specifically are showing up in relationships and in society, vulnerability is still not something that's seen as strong. It's still seen to some men out there, and that vulnerability is a sense of weakness. It gives the ability to get hurt, which, yes, in a sense, that is part of vulnerability's definition, is showing up even if you're scared, knowing that you could get hurt, but still showing up as who you are and having that sense of courage. So I think that, yeah, they're definitely all interplay within like a relationship for
Hmm.
sure.
Yeah, and so now, the main topic that, that's a good segue into, the discussion we wanted to have about, societal gender roles, and how gender roles have changed. And
Hmm.
I think in a lot of ways, if you go back to the nature nurture thing, we're men, we have Y chromosomes, I'm not going to go into the
Hmm.
exceptions. I'm going to, stay with the dominant pattern. Most men are XY and females are XX. And,
Right.
with that comes testosterone and, all the secondary characteristics of men and women, that make us who we are.
Hmm.
I put into the nature category. Men tend to be more warriors, tend to be more muscular, tend to be more
Hmm.
physical. They were the ones, protecting the village and, you know, chasing away the hordes and keeping the women safe and the children protected. Um,
Hmm.
which isn't going to happen with, let's just sit down and talk this over. It's been
Right.
we've,
Right.
as humans, we've had a violent history, a very violent history, um, which continues. This world is no different.
Hmm.
I think we're so much, the weapons have just become more destructive. The political battles more damaging. Um,
Hmm.
Still, a traditional, naturally driven male characteristic is one of violence, one of protection, one of, fighting. Whereas females, they're not going to necessarily be able to just go out into the battlefield and beat someone up or kill someone, to save their people. They've got to work more submissive or subversive, like under the cover, you know,
Hmm.
behind the scenes, with rumors and hearsay, and you attack your enemies sometimes with gossip. And did you hear,
Yeah. Well, don't you think it was interesting when you said that? Sorry to interrupt, but how talk and speech is a woman's tool. And I don't mean that men are not necessarily adept at it, but that's how women's brain and biology is more structured, which is why sometimes when you think of like
Right.
therapy, it's always like, well, that's for women. And it's like, well, people aren't wrong necessarily when they say that. They're not completely wrong, but women are more in touch with their emotions. They're more in tune with it. And some of that has to do with just the higher estrogen levels that they have. So they can really be intuitive and interoceptive of what they feel.
Exactly. Like I said,
So,
that's why I put those characteristics, both physical as well as mental, as well as
mhm.
strategic. You
Yep.
know, those things are all hormonally and chromosomally mediated, um, to bring out your best chances for survival ultimately.
Mhm.
If a woman is like, I'm going to go fight with the men, and she goes out there, chances are she's going to be killed and will never procreate. Whereas if a man is going to, walk out into the field and say, "Hey guys, let's just talk about this," he'll be beheaded. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right.
So, your psychology and your external physicality and your role in society are all interconnected.
Right.
I guess that's the point, but and I think a lot of the struggle that men are having today with testosterone levels dipping very low, female
Hmm.
hormones also, the estrogen and the estrogen mimickers, plastics and various things in our water, in our food,
Hmm.
hormones, growth hormones, et cetera. Um, some of that I think is responsible for some of the changes in gender roles as well. So it's not just,
Maybe
you know,
plays a part. Yeah.
it's not just men are oppressing women, and women are being submissive. It's That's where their best game is. You know what I mean? A quarterback needs to be more finesse, perhaps,
Hmm.
and look at the whole field. Whereas a lineman's just got to worry about moving that guy in front of me out of the way. So every role, every
Yeah.
position has a different strategy. And like I said, and it's become, I think, very complicated in today's world with, what society wants of men, what society doesn't want of men. We don't have hordes of Germanic tribes coming over our borders.
Right.
We're relatively safe here in the suburbs, and down in Florida. I'm sure there's, some snakes maybe that you got to worry about, a few
And
crocs.
some alligators here and there, but
Yeah,
yeah.
alligators, no big deal. But in general, most of us have pretty comfortable lives. So
Yes,
do
I
you really
agree.
need to be a warrior and, wake up making your coffee and slash a goose's neck off just for the hell of it?
Right.
That's
Right.
violence. There's no reason for it.
Right.
Um,
Yes. Nowadays been a big shift for
right.
sure.
So the traditional man and the traditional strategies of a man aren't necessarily needed right now. But it
Hmm.
doesn't change a person's genetics, so it's balancing that culture. And I think a lot of men have become labeled as toxic, as narcissistic, and
Hmm.
all these phrases that we hear out there. Um, I think men are coming to the table. I say, me personally, I think, you come to the table a little confused. You're like, I've been doing this, I can speak only for myself, but, as an orthopedist, it's a very competitive world. You're going up against other
Hmm.
alpha dogs in the fight. And there's a certain strategy with that. And it's earned you success. And it's earned you success to the point that a woman found you desirable, you know, and wanted to
Hmm.
have a relationship. So you're like, okay, I've been doing things right, but now you need to shift gears and downshift into this, in touch with my feminine side,
Yeah.
increase my emotional intelligence. Um,
Yeah.
you know,
Very
um,
true.
so, and females are maybe the same thing. They go through school and then they get into a job and they get a sales job and they're competing with men and you've got to watch your numbers and your accounts and produce like everyone else, which is
Hmm.
more of a warrior mindset. I mean, then they bring their female. So what do you see? What do you see with your people and how gender roles have changed and you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
how
I'm
do
I'm
those come
following
into
you.
your counseling sessions, um, that you have to try? What do you do? What do because it's confusing to everyone. What
Yeah.
specifically do you
Yeah.
do to help people be aware of this nurture nature battle and within a relationship? Go on.
So, it sometimes is can be a little more gender specific. 'Cause I think like you had said, the roles are changing. Men don't need to assert their physical dominance anymore because there's really not any true physical threats out there unless you're in a combat sport or you're in a war where you do have to assert your physicality. But in regards to survival reasons, men don't need that to have that as much. And also the change is happening for women where they're having a lot more opportunities. Obviously, in the past, through the women's suffrage movement, there's a lot of things like they didn't have the rights that men did. They weren't able to get a lot of the opportunities. So now that women are becoming more educated. There's more men now graduating college, more women graduating college than men. There is still a slight pay gap, but women are making more. And so now, with how society was, was always typically the breadwinner. They go out and they work and they bring home the money, and the women are the ones that are going to take care of the kids and take care of things at home. But now that's almost, even if you say that and believe in it, you're almost seen as like toxic masculinity or someone that like chauvinistic or like something. There's something like, no, that's not how it is anymore, which I think there is some truth to that. So now men have to understand that women don't need men as much for their security and their safety because we live in a rather safe world. Well, I guess I should speak for our country. We live in a rather safe country, and the women are able to make their own. make their own money, so that those are two big things that men typically would do for women. And now that women don't necessarily per se need that.
I'm gonna go on. Go on. I gotta grab my charger.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah, I'm
So,
listening.
all right. So yeah, so now that women don't per se need that, men have to understand that there has to be a shift in who they are and how they show up. And a lot of that is coming in with a sense of being in tune with their emotions and understanding that women are actually looking for mates that can be there, can hear them, can understand them, can be there to listen to them and show up for them and be there while being in touch with their own emotions. So that's like a different type of support and care that men need to bring to the table if they want to be competitive in the game of finding a mate. And so I think that's a really big shift that I see, which a lot of the men that I work with is that's what we really have to touch on is first off, how can we understand that we need to be aware of what emotions we're even feeling. And then it's about how can you process those emotions and then how can you regulate those emotions. And yes, that involves your past traumas, the patterns of your past, but it's also like, okay, now we have to understand how can you be safe for a woman. And by safe, I mean that a woman can show up and she can express how she feels, and you're not going to react in a way that's going to be deleterious to the relationship. Like if you were to just immediately try to solve the problem when that's not what they want, or if you're going to immediately try to input what you think, which is not what she wants, or immediately try to avoid or stonewall and not say anything, which is also not what she wants. So it's really having an understanding of being in tune with yourself and your emotions and how are you going to show up in that relationship so that the woman that you're with feels seen and heard and safe. Does
Mhm.
that make sense with kind of how men
No,
are
it
handling things
it
right now?
and I'm going to throw another monkey wrench into the mix of things. We deal with hormones a lot, and we deal mostly with men. But we actually look. I'm meeting today with a guy. We're looking to transition into some female hormones. Opening up some other
Hmm.
avenues. Um, but in general, men are creatures of the sun. You know, we wake up, our testosterone level is high. We go to war, we battle we do what we have to do during the day, and then our testosterone level starts to fall towards the end of the day. We go to sleep, our testicles are secreting the testosterone, preparing us for the next day. We're licking our wounds,
Hmm.
going into the cave, whatever, recovering for the next day of battle. So it's a sunrise, sunset fluctuation in male hormones. Females are creatures of the moon. Their hormones fluctuate based on their menstrual cycle, based on, whether they're ovulating, whether it's a luteal phase, there's all the different, so, um, and all those things affect behavior in different ways. They're
Hmm.
a little hornier during their ovulation period, a little more cranky during their premenstrual, so,
Hmm.
on any given day, a man is living the same life, but a woman may be, interpreting, receiving, expressing things in a different
Hmm.
way. And we're like, what the heck did I do wrong?
Right.
Why is she mad at me? And it's like, well, she's not, don't
Yeah.
take it personally, buddy. She's not mad at you. She's mad at everyone. Or she's not,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, you, the way I look at the world a lot of times is, I said, there are those hormonal things. And then, men
Hmm.
go through andropause, men's testosterone levels go down.
Yeah.
They become more tearful, more emotional, more sensitive, um, less energetic. Whereas women
Hmm.
can become, with menopause, it has a lot of functions. And I- estrogen has recently come off the FDA's black box list. They're
Hmm.
becoming more open to prescribe, which I think is good, because we're not living till, we're not retiring early. We're working through our middle age,
Right.
and we're still hustling
Right.
during our middle age into our older years. Um, so maintaining that hormonal balance. But like I said, these relationship issues and these day-to-day things that you need to be aware of as a man, you also have to understand some of her cycle and why she may be more moody, why she may be, this isn't the time to joke about that. This isn't the, you know, it,
Hmm.
it becomes very, and I think men and women are more in touch with these things. They're more in touch with their feelings, their emotions, their
No, for
hormones,
sure.
their sensitivities. Um,
For sure.
whereas men are just oftentimes bull in a china shop and you know
Can be. Yeah.
envy.
Takes
Yeah,
more effort. It takes more concerted effort for a man to be in touch with his emotions, but I think it really takes more concerted effort for a man to tap into empathy. And I think that that's where women empathy being an emotion, but women are naturally better at empathy, so therefore they're able to see the perspective of their partner or someone else, where men, we have to put in more effort and it doesn't come as second nature to us. So for men to be empathetic, it is building a skill set. Because when you can build that sense of empathy, then you're able to kind of see what it's like through the perspective of someone else, which would therefore prepare you to be better equipped within a relationship, whether it's with a female friend, whether it's with a partner, whether it's with your mom, whether it's with your sister, whatever it may be. But it's having that understanding of if I can empathize with this person, I can understand them better. If I understand them better, it's going to be easier for them to understand me because now I know how they function, which is the tough part for a lot of people that I work with is that sense of empathy, especially for the men, but also women, is like, how can I empathize? Because everyone just wants to be understood, but they don't want to understand the other person first. And I think that is a key to like a healthy relationship. And for a lot of the guys I work with, sometimes I just tell them if a woman is coming to you, even your partner or someone you're potentially interested in, just shut up. Just don't talk. If they're coming at you, don't allow your emotional state, which may push you to be defensive or to be assertive, when they're bringing concerns or trying to explain to you how they function, just don't talk. Instead, take a deep breath or two and just get in a sense of curiosity. Be like, okay, so they're telling me, like, why are they telling me this? How can I be more empathetic with what they're telling me? Because as soon as you understand them and a woman feels heard, she's going to be a lot more receptive to what you have to say after that.
yeah. No, I agree. And that's why, like I said, with the clinic here, there are some clinics you can go and you can get your testosterone checked and you can get your pills and your shots and your whatever
Hmm.
you need. Um, I call them testosterone mills. But I think my experiences in life, I've got some, scratches on my car door, some dents in the back bumper, and whatever. As you
Hmm.
go through life, you realize that it's not all about just being the best man. It's about um, understanding your environment. That's
Hmm.
strategy. But you talked earlier about vulnerability and men expressing vulnerability. I think we almost need to change that word, the idea of therapy being vulnerable, and take it as, I don't want to go and talk about my problems. Um,
Hmm.
I think with men, if you twist it more towards you're not expressing your problems, you're understanding your enemy better. You're gathering intel. You're gathering intel on what it is that you need to know to work better with. Not necessarily
Hmm.
enemy, but your woman, your female partners in this relationship. You need to incorporate them into your team better,
Hmm.
so that you can work together better instead of spending all your time fighting, 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 doing this all the time. The horses need to be pulling in one direction for the most part. But you
Right.
can't just tell this horse to just pull harder. You need to finesse it a little better. You need to understand the idea of bringing mental health into a men's clinic for me seemed natural. It seemed like a natural progression. You can't just give guys testosterone without knowing how to use it, without knowing, how to strategize, how to admit
Right.
your weaknesses, how to be vulnerable. Um, not as a sign of weakness, but as a sign of you're changing your role. You're not a 15, 20-year-old kid anymore. Um,
Hmm.
you can't just be a worker bee. You have to also be a strategist. You have to be a general. You have to move up the ranks, and look at the strategy and use your assets, your children, in order to help the family and help everyone else. So, I do, and appreciate you coming on to share with these thoughts, as an expert in the field, um, because I think it's a big part of a mental health program for men, or of a men's
Hmm.
clinic. the ultimate
Yeah.
men's clinic, the whole idea of it, it's not just, it's not the little head, it's the big head, you know,
Yeah.
it's your team,
True.
it's your society, it's your partners in crime, your friends, your relationships, and all those really need to come into play. Um, when men are dealing with their health or their problems or their issues. You can't just go in there and push harder, push harder, push harder. You got to work
Right.
harder, you know.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. They're all, like you said, they're all intertwined. And even just looking at like what you do, it's the mind body connection is so strong. And men, I think, are so much more body oriented. When they explain, a lot of times when men will explain like how they feel, they're not going to typically say, "Oh, I'm feeling like really distraught right now. I'm feeling, quite apathetic." They're going to say, "I have a pit in my stomach," or "I have weight in my chest." They're very physical, and so
Mhm.
I think it is bringing in the idea that if you can have that mind body connection and really looking at the human being as like a holistic creature, and like how you talk about bringing in how the gender roles are changing and how men are having to change drastically faster than we're kind of equipped to deal with
Mhm.
not only gender roles but how technology is playing a part in this. So it is really looking at that, looking at your environment, and then it's also that deeper work of like understanding how your past has influenced your present moment, which will then influence your thoughts, which will create your future. So it's all tied in together. And I think that what you do is phenomenal, and being not only like open-minded, but being aware and intelligent enough to realize that when you're going through things physically and you want to make changes there, the brain is right there with it. And if you aren't working with those together, then it's just kind of an incomplete model of, you know, treatment.
Right. And then, the emotions, when you go to, once again, if you break it down into the three brains, the basic functions, if you've got an ulcer in your gut, you're, not going to be valuable physically. But
Hmm.
also the emotional part, and you're right, men and their connection to their emotional part, is often very limited. You're, you're,
Hmm.
you're either fine or you're angry.
Exactly.
There's no, I'm fine, and
Yeah.
then you have a funeral or something, and this emotion comes out, and everyone's like, what the heck's going on there?
Yeah.
And how men deal with loss, how men deal with separation, all sorts of
Hmm.
things, um, tends to express itself in anger, and anger or nothing. Like you say, silence, just
Hmm.
say nothing. So your options are say nothing or be silent. If you start crying over a woman or crying over a situation, people are like, he's kind of lost it.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it's, that's but having a coach, to get back to the point, having a coach, someone where you can be vulnerable, you can get those things out.
Hmm.
If I'm in session with you and I start crying or getting emotional or, you know, dust in the room, whatever,
Yeah.
you've been there, done that, seen that all the time. That's something you can handle, and something men need to address. But you're not going to get any sympathy from your woman with that. It's not in their, I don't believe it's in their genetics, in their nature to, accept a man. There's all sorts of jokes and memes about that. It's like,
Yeah.
go on, babe. I think it's okay. You can just tell me how you feel. And then the guy tells her how he feels. And she's like, I didn't know he was gay or whatever.
Yeah. 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 Oh, yeah. Yep. There's always a
He's
bit
a
of truth
very,
behind stereotypes.
yeah, you're not gonna get much sympathy from your partner, unfortunately. Um, which makes it more important to have a coach and to have a male coach and to have a male coach with some seasoning, who's been through things. I mean, you and your cancer struggle. I mean, if you want to get into that, how that's really changed your softness, your strategy, and you face the Grim Reaper.
Yeah.
That do
Yeah.
to you? How does that change your mindset of how does that put life into perspective for you? And
Jesus.
what do you come out on the other side with that? If
Yeah. I
if
mean,
that's not too personal.
No. I mean, that's vulnerability right there. You know, if I wasn't going to talk about that, then I'd be denying my own sense of vulnerability. And so I think that having that, like you said, encountering something that can take your life is it's unbelievably scary and almost awe-inspiring at the same time because it did something to me that that does to other people that go through traumatic experiences where there's something called this post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Everyone knows that.
Yeah.
And there's PTG, it's post-traumatic growth. It's something that is more newer, but it has research and studies behind it, and it's shown to be an actual thing that you can experience. And I like to put
And
myself in
then there,
that category.
yeah, but then there's also the complex CPTSD, complex
Yes.
post-traumatic stress, and I see a lot of that in my adoptee friends
Yep.
and colleagues. That it's this trauma that I never had any trauma. I never had any trauma in my life. I had a blessed life. I was the golden child, you know. But then I realized that it's like I lost my parents at birth.
Mhm.
If my parents were killed in a car crash at birth, everyone would be, oh, geez, he lost his parents at birth. They all died in a car accident. They saved the baby.
Yeah.
What a tragic thing. But it's like, oh, they give them away for adoption. Oh, what a wonderful thing. You just lost your parents, and now you have to try and get to know these new people.
Yeah.
That's a societal thing that people don't deal with. So a lot of like I said, the complex trauma, most people won't admit to PTSD, but when you introduce the idea of complex trauma, it's like you may not even know that it's trauma, but we all have some of
Yeah.
that. But go on. Yeah. Come
Yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah. No, definitely, definitely. This is kind of just different, yeah, different spheres to this and different avenues that uh traumatic experience can have with you. But I think what really happened is when I was going through my journey with cancer, like just I'll try to make it rather brief to not drag it out too long, but I
No,
think
no,
that
this is important. I think it's relevant, and there's other people going through that, so I'm
yeah,
sure they want to hear it. You know.
yeah, no, I appreciate that. But going off of hormones. So my hormones were actually a complete mess when I was going through my cancer. So I was experiencing different types of emotional states that I was not necessarily um, aware that I could hit or be comfortable with at the same time. Very heightened levels of anxiety and just um, not necessarily I could cry all the time, but it was almost like there was a block was almost removed in a weird way where I was able to feel more open about expressing certain emotions or being able to, if sadness or whatever was there, that if I was to release some tears, it all of a sudden it wasn't that hard anymore because at the end of the day, when you have cancer and you know that like there's something that could take your life, all of a sudden being a little more vulnerable was rather easy because it just putting it in perspective. So, and what I learned from that too is just my vulnerabilities of always thinking I had to, be the strong one, or always had to be the best at something, or didn't want to show people any sort of, hesitancies or weaknesses, whether it was in my physicality, my profession, or just anything, or like my knowledge. I started to realize that when I embraced that vulnerability and was, expressing to people like, hey, I have something that could take my life, and showing them like fear, showing them anxiety, showing them emotions that typically men do not want to show. The I think also with my training and understanding how to not like dump it on people and just go off the deep end with it, but more to be more precise about how I was going to express it. But the reception from people, whether it was friends, my partner of 13 years, she was phenomenal with it, family, um, new people that I'd never met before. It it almost was like the connection I was able to make with them was so much deeper, so much faster because of what I went through. So cancer was just a really big catalyst in my growth process to see that tapping into certain emotions and vulnerability was became a real strength. And it's something now I carry more deeply, and it's something that I really do with the men and women that I work with is teaching them about vulnerability, how it can be actually seen as a strength, but also being careful to not let vulnerability be too much around the wrong people who could then abuse that.
Right.
So
Yeah,
there
that's
is
the
a,
that's the key. And
yeah,
that's why I guess that's where I really see the value of of having a coach or a therapist or, especially for life. Who needs
Hmm.
a life? I've been living my whole life. Why do I need a life coach? Well, you absolutely do. And I said, I think especially men during these days when their roles are changing and their understanding of how things are changing doesn't necessarily register in their brain. A lot of men, I think,
Hmm.
I think men are doers, first of all. So if
Yep.
something's going wrong, just do more, and sometimes you could be
Hmm.
digging a ditch or digging a hole in the wrong direction, the wrong place. Um, but also to be able to let down that vulnerability, like you said, in an environment where it's safe.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go to my boss. I'm not going to go to my supervisor and
Right.
tell them I'm tearful because whatever. Um, that's not something you want to do, but you still need to figure it out. Otherwise, it's going to come out in maladaptive behaviors, maladaptive,
Right. Right.
and
Absolutely.
and like I said, I think men, a lot of the guys I deal with, a lot of blue collar guys, but also, executives, people that are, senior level executives. Who do they go to? And I think it's difficult for men to know who to go to.
Hmm.
Um, you know, like I said, whether you're a blue collar construction guy, a fisherman, um, you don't want to whine to your boss where you're supposed to be performing every day.
Right.
But like I said, a senior executive level man, who do they go to? They're not going to go to the people that work for them. So a coach, someone to guide them through some of these issues in life, I think is very important. Um, Almost mandatory. How do you get through
Yeah.
how do
Right.
you get
I
through
agree.
life on your own with one perspective when you have brothers out there that are going through a lot of the same things, brothers that are going through cancer, brothers that are going through breakups, divorces,
Hmm.
deaths, all the life struggles, and we tend
Right.
to just bury it, bury it, bury it, cover it underneath this thick wall of, protection. Um,
Hmm.
but if the foundation of the building is creaky and weak, it's gonna show itself in some way, and you'd rather try and control that. Boy, we've
Right.
covered a lot today. This has been
Yeah.
you
We
know,
ran the gamut
I think we could go on, but we're kind of coming to the end of our time. So,
for sure.
and we've talked about this before. If we can have other topics and have you back on to discuss various things. Maybe current events or something that's going on, whatever you're interested, but you're welcome back anytime. I think we've had a great discussion. Um,
I agree.
I'll give it back to you. How would you want to finish up? What would you tell guys that are out there struggling in one way? How do they get a hold of you? What should they be thinking before they go and consult with a coach or mental health expert?
Yeah. I would just want to say, I guess to leave it is that, you know, you're not alone. And I know that may sound cliche, but we all go through different things, and it is in men's nature sometimes to keep that all in. And that is one of the easiest ways to self-destruct your life is when you're keeping in things that are troubling you, your emotions that are difficult to handle. When you try to suppress that, that could be what is going to implode. And I just want other men out there to know that there are people out there that are not only going through something maybe similar to you, but are there to hear you and support you. Whether that is a therapist, a coach, a doctor, a a friend, I mean, a brother. Like there's so many people out there that can help. I just want a lot of men to understand that it's okay to open up. It's okay to be honest with the right people that you can have some trust in. And I think from there, like things can get a lot better.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to end it. So thank you. Let's keep in
Thank
touch.
you.
Yeah, let's keep in touch. If you need anything, you've got my number, reach out.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'll do the same. So thank you once again. This has been the latest episode of the Ultimate Men's Movement, brought to you by the Ultimate Men's Clinic here in New Bedford, Massachusetts.